We have heard all this before. This is a statement that you'll sometimes hear people who are suspicious of promises, of prophecies. We have heard all this before. If you've ever been to one of those political rallies, especially in cities like Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, they'll have like aldermen's or city council members show up for a listening session. They're running for office, and they'll say things like, we're going to be tough on crime. We're going to help improve our schools, protect our kids, clean up the streets, and bring integrity back to local government. But when they get up and say that, somewhere along the line, there'll be some older woman who'll approach the microphone and say just those words. You know, we've heard all this before. We have heard all this before. And so she is suspicious. She lacks faith because she's been scandalized because these promises were not brought forth. There was no follow through. This happens in families. I've seen this firsthand. In a family that has a family member who maybe is an alcoholic and is stumbling drunk and gets in trouble. Finally, when they sober up, they're full of promises. I promise it'll never happen again. I promise it'll never happen again. Or even an adulterous spouse, also always full of promises. A teenager keeps getting in trouble at school or gets thrown in jail for whatever. Parents go pick him up, and all the way home, I promise this won't happen again. And then those famous words come out, you know, we've heard this before. We've heard this before, and they don't believe. Now, having said that, I think that can work in the opposite direction, in a positive direction, that when we hear things over and over, we come to believe, especially when promises are kept, prophecies come true, and people keep their vows. We say, we've heard this before. You know, for a Christian who reads the opening line of the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Us Christians should be able to say, you know, we've heard that before. We've heard this before. Where did we hear it? At the very beginning of the Bible, the first words of Genesis. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. Wow, who's saying this? Jesus is saying this. We've heard this before. And God kept to his covenants. Every time he promised Adam, Noah, Moses, David, they just kept to his covenant. His promises came true. He followed through on his covenant. We've heard this before. And now we can trust because he promised to save us, and he did save us. Now today, hopefully our ears are perked up too when we hear the gospel. Jesus said, or the gospel writer said, the Jews murmured against Jesus when he was saying, I am the bread of life, come down from heaven. I am the bread of life. Well, we've heard that before. When did we hear a murmur? Well, back in Exodus, Deuteronomy, when they were hungry, when they'd seen all the miracles of God, they started to complain. They started to murmur, M-U-R-M-U-R-E-D. I think that's how you spell it. What are they doing? He's lying, he's lying, he's lying. But then actually, bread starts to fall from the sky. He actually feeds them, even though they're doubting him, even though they're gossiping under their breath, murmuring. And then Jesus says the same thing. When they start to murmur, he hears them. You know, my Father gave you bread from heaven, and I am the bread come down from heaven. At this point, they had already seen Jesus' miracles. They had seen them with their eyes. He had followed through. And why did Jesus perform miracles? Many reasons, out of mercy, mostly, but also that they could believe in him by seeing his miracles, that they may believe the things they maybe can't see, like the forgiveness of sins. You can't see that, but you can see him multiply loaves and fishes. Oh, he had already done that. And still they're what? Murmuring. We hear this. Hopefully they would have heard, wow, we heard this before, and God came through. Can it be that Jesus is the bread of life, that the Eucharist is real, that when he says, this is my body, because we've heard this before, that I am the bread of life, that it can be true, and that the Father has sent me. You know, I also think that we as Christians, we as Catholic Christians, we should keep our ears open to even the secular world. Because the culture of death, they will sometimes steal our words. They'll sometimes steal our precepts and mock us with them. For example, I think I've used this example before. As we get closer to Halloween, that's right, we're getting closer. There's already candy in Walmart all over the place. They'll have bags that say hocus pocus on it. What is that term, hocus pocus? Well, that's mocking the Eucharist. That's mocking the Mass. In Latin, it's hoc est einem corpus meum. This is my body. So what are they doing? They're mocking the Mass. They would say, those Catholics do that hocus pocus up on the altar. But you don't even have to go to Walmart. You can just watch the opening ceremony of the Olympics. And what do they mock? The Last Supper. The covenantal first Eucharist. They start to mock us. But I even think we have to keep our ears open too, because oftentimes the devil just has the opposite images and sayings of our Lord. For example, in a few chapters, Jesus in John chapter 10, 18, he's going to say something like, nobody takes my life from me. I lay it down freely. And I take it back up again. I lay it down freely. I sacrifice my body. I choose to, out of love for you. What is he saying? My body, my choice. Wow, we've heard that before too. We've heard that before. Our ears should be ringing. Sort of the anti-Eucharist. Because abortion is the sacrament of Satan. It is sacrificing the most innocent so that people can live without being inconvenienced. Jesus, the God-man, sacrificed himself willingly. He chose to give his body away, not sacrifice somebody else's body. We even see the evil one echoing the Eucharist, the very essential parts of our faith. We should be recognized when we've heard something before. But if we deny, hide, avoid the Eucharist, we kind of not talk about it, profess it, and people are not hearing it, we are contributing, I think, to contraceptive mentality. That's right. It even finds its way into our families. It becomes a contraceptive mentality. Because if that's not his body, then his body doesn't matter. And then if his body doesn't matter, neither does ours. It's just a body. It's just a body. We'll hear that. We talk about it, especially when it comes to marriage. They'll say it's just a part of plumbing. Well, plumbing is important, especially when it doesn't work. And they'll even refer to unborn children as clump of cells. What a violation to the most vulnerable among us to sacrifice them. Yes, I think this all goes together. And I've seen it firsthand. Some of you know I traveled to England for a few weeks. I went there, kind of my bucket list before I die. I went to school there many years ago. And I'm glad I went, and I'm not going back. And I know this is on TV, so I may get some calls from my British priest friends. But England, for 1,500 years was a Catholic country. And then for about 500 years, it was a Protestant country because all that Henry VIII stuff, and that's X-rated. You can tell your kids later. But now it is not a Christian country. Oh, they have their religion. It's just not a Christian country. And you see surrounded by Christian buildings, churches that used to be ours, Catholic churches empty. And there's small other Catholic churches, Anglican churches that are empty. But there's small Catholic churches that are full. But here's what I saw in London and Oxford. Lots of LGBTQ flags and women in burqas. Total burqas. There's Muslims everywhere. And little do they know that they have nothing in common. But I would even say for the Muslim community, they quietly stole some plays from our playbook. They pray 5 times a day, and they believe in having children. And they go to their mosque faithfully, where the other side is not having children, mocking us. They won't mock them. And it's no longer Christian. Now, there's some pockets there. There's some pockets there. But as a Catholic priest walking around, you can't help but notice the dynamic. And I think it all goes back to Henry VIII. I think it all goes back to a contraceptive mentality that happened in about 1930. But when the Eucharist is watered down, because for Anglicans, you can believe in the real presence as you saw on the chart last week, or not. When you start to water down that, then his sacrifice gets watered down, and then your body gets watered down. And it's just a body. It's not a supernatural one. But I haven't even said that. We have to find ways to profess, to celebrate, to proclaim the truth of the Eucharist, the truth of marriage, the truth of children. Now, yesterday I got a chance to witness a wedding, and I enjoy doing weddings. I do. It was a big crowd, and this didn't happen yesterday, but sometimes as a priest, when I'm preaching at a wedding, I talk about the sacrament of marriage. I talk about married life, and sometimes people start murmuring. Who is this celibate guy? I think you know about marriage. So it gives me a chance to talk about celibacy. To what my body and priests, and I'm not bragging about some great sacrifice. I love my life. I love my life. But I have given my whole body to the church, and when a husband and wife get married, they're telling someone, this is my body, you can have all of it. And there's a gift, there's a sacrifice there, but it all points to heaven. But it's all bound up in him, the bridegroom who was never married. All bound up together to get us to heaven. So a husband and wife and me as a priest supposed to get my bride to heaven, because a married couple will not be married in heaven. Let me say that again. You will not be married in heaven. It's till death do you part. Now, sometimes the newlyweds or the young couples will go, oh, we're not married. The older couples are like, whoo, that's over with. But when it comes to marriage, the Eucharist, the church, seek opportunities to talk about the reality of Jesus, the God-man come in the flesh. I'm friends with some Baptist ministers, and I had lunch with a nice Baptist minister, and he asked me, do you really believe that host is Jesus? And then I asked him, do you really believe that little baby in Bethlehem in that crib was actually God? Because that little baby was pooping and crying, and you could poke him. That's God. There was a little bit of silence like it is right now, a little awkward silence. But I said, you're on the way, because Jesus said, this is my body, and we're Bible Christians. But again, if we deny, hide, avoid, we kind of adopt a secular view of our bodies, of his body, a contraceptive mentality, and then people stop hearing the truth. They stop hearing the truth. And we can actually put numbers to this now. We know that, I think it was a 2021, 2022 Pew Research, 69% of Catholics don't believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. Well, that's many times just on us clergy. But a third of those say, we never even heard that before. I didn't know that. A third of them never heard it. So that is a message to all of us. If we're going to convince the Jehovah's Witness, the Baptist, the Methodists of the real presence, we have to convince our own people and to stop murmuring it, but proclaim it, announce it. Yes, Jesus is really the Eucharist. The Eucharist is really Jesus. And if they hear it enough, if they start saying, yeah, we've heard that before, and if they've heard it before, hopefully they'll hear it enough, and maybe, just maybe, they'll start believing.